Okay, so we've all heard about the AI revolution, right? But what's actually powering it all? In just the next few minutes, we're going to pull back the curtain on the technology that's really changing our world, the large language model. I mean, you've probably used an AI chatbot at this point, maybe to help write an email or brainstorm some ideas or just to see what it says. But have you ever stopped to wonder what's actually making it tick? What's the engine under the hood? Well, that engine is called a large language model, or LLM for short. And honestly, the name tells you pretty much everything you need to know. Large because it has billions of parameters. Think of them like tiny little knobs and dials that get adjusted as it learns. Language because, well, it's trained on a massive digital library of books, articles, and websites. And model because at its core, it's just a really sophisticated system for predicting what comes next. And this is going to sound way too simple, but it's true. Imagine taking someone, forcing them to read a huge chunk of the internet, and then the only test they ever have to take is guessing the next word in any given sentence. That is the fundamental task of an LLM. It's not thinking like a human, but by getting incredibly good at that one single task on a massive scale, it learns all the patterns of grammar, facts, and even different styles of reasoning. Okay, so how do you even build one of these digital brains? It's definitely not magic, but it is kind of like a super complex recipe that needs just the right ingredients and a very, very precise set of instructions. It really boils down to this four-step journey. First, you gather an almost unimaginable amount of text. Then you have to translate all of that into a language the machine can actually process. After that comes the really heavy lifting, training the model to find all the patterns. And finally, you polish it with human feedback to make it helpful and, safe. So first up, all that text gets crunched down into these little numerical pieces called tokens. You can think of them like digital Lego bricks that the computer can understand. But, and this is a big but, this process reveals an early bias. Because the system is often built for English, other languages can require way more bricks to say the exact same thing, which makes them more difficult and more expensive for the AI to process. The real game changer, the moment everything shifted, was back in 2017 with a new design called the transformer. See, before this, AI models had a terrible memory. They'd literally forget the beginning of a long sentence by the time they got to the end. The transformer's big idea was something called an attention mechanism, which let the model see the whole sentence at once and understand how all the words relate to each other. And as you can see from this timeline, that one idea is what lit the fuse on the AI boom we're in today. Now that pre-training phase, this is where the heavy lifting happens. We're talking immense computational power, thousands of specialized computers running 24/7 for weeks, maybe even months. And the cost? Well, for the biggest models, you're looking at millions of dollars. This is not something you can just build in your garage. It's something only a few major tech labs can afford to do. Okay, and finally, after all that work, you get this raw, pre-trained model. But this last step, fine-tuning, is absolutely crucial. See, pre-training just makes it a powerful text predictor. Fine-tuning is where we, the humans, step in. We give it feedback to teach it to follow instructions and align with what we expect. This is what turns it from just a text-spitting machine into a genuinely useful assistant. All right, so now we get to the magic. What happens when you take these simple next word predictors and just scale them up to an insane size? Well, something really weird and unexpected starts to happen. They begin to develop abilities that go way beyond what they were originally trained to do. Yeah, researchers started noticing this totally fascinating thing. As the models got bigger, more data, more parameters, they started developing these surprising new skills called emergent abilities. These are things nobody programmed into them, and they don't show up in smaller models. They just emerge from the complexity. And these superpowers are really what make today's AI feel so incredible. Things like learning a new task on the fly just from a couple of examples, or breaking down a tough problem by reasoning step by step. They can even use external tools like a calculator or a search engine, and now they're starting to understand and generate images and audio, not just text. And here's the wild part. We can actually unlock these advanced abilities with really simple, clever prompting. Just by adding a phrase like, let's think step by step, we can guide the model to break down a problem and show its work. And that simple trick dramatically improves its accuracy on really complex stuff, like math problems or logic puzzles. But of course, all this incredible power, it doesn't come for free. It brings with it some pretty significant challenges and risks that, honestly, we are just beginning to wrap our heads around. So it's time for a reality check. One of the biggest problems you hear about is something called hallucination. This is when the model spits out something that sounds totally fluent and confident, but it's just plain wrong or complete nonsense. It's not lying, it's just predicting the next most plausible word in a sentence, even if that path leads it completely away from reality. And here's the thing, since these models learn from text that we wrote, they also learn our biases. It's almost inevitable. They can reinforce stereotypes about gender, they tend to overrepresent Western culture because most of the training data is in English, and they can even soak up the political biases that are all over the internet. And it's not just about hallucinations and bias. The whole field is wrestling with these other massive issues. You've got huge legal fights over copyright infringement. There are serious security flaws that can be exploited. And then there's the massive environmental cost, the sheer amount of energy it takes to power these things. The impact of all this? It's already here. It's fundamentally changing how we deal with information. I mean, this quote really says it all. We've hit a point where it's getting almost impossible to know if you're reading something from a person or a machine, which raises some huge questions about trust and authenticity.
So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. LLMs are basically a mirror. They reflect back at us our collective knowledge and our creativity, but also all of our flaws, our messiness, and our biases. They're amazing tools for sure, but they are not perfect all-knowing oracles. Not even close.
Which leaves us with a really big question as we weave these systems deeper and deeper into our lives. These models are a reflection of the digital world we've all built together. So we have to ask ourselves, what exactly are we teaching them?